Hello, everybody. Nick DeTiro here. Let's talk about basic variables that we use in this particular section of the course. And you may come across other variables within this section, but let's talk about the main ones. The first three are what we call primitive variables. Those are variables that are inside Java. They're specifically variables, and those are integer, double, and char. And then we're going to talk about string, even though technically string is not a variable. It's a class because you can do things with it. We're going to treat string as a variable. Now, for demonstration purposes, I'm going to go to my command prompt. So let's go to my command prompt. At my command prompt, I'm going to do some demonstrations with variables using Java Shell. So if at a command prompt, if I type JShell, this is going to basically open up a, lack of a better word, a Java interpreter, right? We use JShell for troubleshooting and things like that. We really don't write code with it, but if we're kind of testing small snippets of code, we may use JShell. Or I use it for demonstration purposes like you see here. Now, the first thing we need to understand about Java is that it's a declarative language, which means you have to declare the variables before you use them. If you're familiar with a programming language like Python, you don't have to. You can create, in Python, you can create variables on the fly. Both have their strengths and weaknesses. I tend to prefer the Java approach, the declarative approach, because it allows me to keep track of my variables. Python, I end up losing track of my variables, but Python is also a very good language. So let's start with something really simple. Let's do the area of a rectangle, and our rectangle is going to be very boring. Our rectangle is going to be done with integers. So the first thing I'm going to do with my finding the area of my rectangle, I'm going to declare the variables that I'm going to use. The variables of a rectangle are width and height. So I'm going to say integer width, and that's going to, if you look here, be special attention, it's going to create an integer variable, assign a value of 0. And I'm going to do the exact same thing with height and do it. And you can see that there's no decimal point there. I know this is now a integer. Let's find the area of my rectangle. Well, before we do that, let's create a string called rectangle so we keep things in mind here. We won't use it in this demonstration, but this time I'm going to say string, and I'm going to create a string variable, but I'm going to assign it right on the fly. And this one I'm going to say rectangle. Spell it correctly. All right. And you'll notice that it created a string called shape, and we inserted the literal rectangle in it. Let's find an area. Well, the first thing we have to do is we have to declare. And because this is integer arithmetic, we'll say int area. And it's assigned a value. Now, if I was to multiply, right now, if I was to multiply width times height, I'll get a 0 because I haven't assigned a value to them. So let's do that. Let's say width is going to be equal to 5, right? And height is going to be equal to 17. Now, let me clear my screen, make it a little easier to read. Now let's do area is equal to width times height. All right. And 5 times 17 is 85. When we measure things, we really don't tend to use integers too much, rough estimates and stuff like that. Usually measurements we think about as in doubles or sometimes you'll hear me call them floats, something that might have a decimal point afterwards. So let's do the area of a triangle. Now, the area of a triangle is 1/2 base times height. So there's a good chance, because we're using 1/2, that it's going to need it to be a double because it's going to potentially have something after a decimal point, after the decimal point. So let's create a couple integers. I'm going to say double base, and you can see that base's value is 0.0, and we're going to say double height. Same thing here. If we use area right now, area has already been declared as an integer. Let's redeclare it as a base. I mean, as a double. So we're going to say area. And you can now see that it basically wiped out the area from the previous example, and they're all equal to 0.0. Let's assign some values here. We're going to say the base is going to be equal to 5.1. And the height is going to be equal to 10.0. Now, it may appear to be a whole number. I chose 10.0 for a reason. One, to demonstrate good programming technique. Even if there's no value after the decimal point, put the 0.0 there. And I'll do another demonstration, say 1/2, if we have 0.5, you put the 0 there. It allows your code to be more readable. And now if I say area is equal to, we're doing a triangle. So a triangle is 1/2 base times height. I'm going to say 1.0 divided by 2.0 times base times height. All right. Now, could I have used 0.5? Absolutely. I chose not to. As a personal choice, I figured, I'm always thinking 1/2 base times height, but everybody knows 0.5 is 1/2. But just my little perk. And I hit enter and we created an area 2.5. Just for demonstration purposes, let us use 0.5 times base times height. And again, notice that I did put a 0 in front of the decimal point. Could I just do 0.5? Absolutely. But this makes it far more readable. The chances of missing that decimal point or not understanding it does become a factor, especially in something like this. If, 10.0, if I just have this 10, it may look like an integer, and we can see that the area is 25.5. Let's follow the same approach, but now instead of doing it in the Java shell, let's do it in our IDEs where we're actually coding this material. Right? So I'm going to go to my Replit, and I'm going to keep repeating this in all my videos and in the classwork and stuff like that whenever it comes up. When we're using Replit, especially in Java, it's going out and it's looking for the main.class, this main.java. It goes out there and looks for it. So I'm going to type, again, going to keep repeating this, public. And what does public mean in this regard when it comes to class? It means if I had multiple classes over here in this project, let's say 50, 60 files in this project, all those classes could use this class. Class, uppercase M for main, and there is my braces. Remember, inside Java, I'm going to keep saying this over and over so it sticks with you. Blocks of code are contained within the braces. So this entire class is going to be within this block, within those braces. Now, I'm just putting spaces in there for readability. And let's do our main class. Again, what does public mean? Public means that this method, we're building a method within the class. This method is going to be available to all other classes in our project. And we're going to say static. And what does static mean? Static just means that we're not creating an instance of this class. Later on, when we talk about objects and classes in great detail later on, that's important. What creating a instance of a class is, or creating an object, we're not going to do that. Void is we're not returning anything. Again, in other examples down the road, you may return a value. Let's say, for example, I create a method called find area of triangle. Well, that's going to return the value of the area of a triangle. We're not doing that in this discussion. We're going to give it the method name, which is main. So when I hit run, it looks for the main class, and within the main class, it looks for the main method to start from. Those are your launching points. See my previous videos. And I'll put some arguments in here. String. We'll talk about this when we get to it. Args. And we'll do our braces. Here's now from this brace to this brace, that's going to be our main class. And I'm going to say string. Oops, type it correctly, Nick. String is going to be shape equal triangle. Put my semicolon here. Now, semicolon, a little bit different than what we saw. I'm basically doing two steps here in one line. I am declaring the shape string, but I'm also assigning it a value. So this is just a quicker way to kind of expedite things, all right? So a lot of times, if I don't assign it a value, it's just going to give it a blank. If I do it with a double or integer, it puts a 0. This is kind of just a quick and dirty way of doing it. And then I'm going to say double base, and the same thing here. I'm going to assign the value here, semicolon. I'm going to say double height and 10.0. I'm going to change this to 5.1 just for argument's sake. So string, double base, and we're going to say double area. This time we're not assigning a value because we're calculating the value here. And then down here, we're going to calculate the value. Area is equal to 1/2 times base times height. Now, I know some of you are just going crazy with this. You know, why doesn't Nick just use a 0.5? I could. I just choose not to. All right. All righty. And let's print this out. In another video, we will talk about basic printing in Java, but we'll say system.out.println, and we're going to give it a little bit of a string here to kind of make it a little bit prettier. And I'm going to give it a literal. I'm going to say the area of this plus shape plus another literal is plus area. Semicolon, make that a capital T. All right. So I'm going to assign all these values, and then I'm going to calculate this value, and then I'm going to print out what I did. System.out.println, the area of this space plus the shape plus the is plus the area. If I typed everything correctly, and sometimes that doesn't happen, I might have to do some debugging here. Let's run it and let's see what we get. Now, when I hit this run, it's going to go through this entire project of one file, but it would go through this entire project. It will look for the main.java here, then it's going to look for the main. But if there was 50 or 60 other files in here, it would compile all those other files, and it would still look for that. Give it a second. And that's what this line here is telling us. This line here was telling us it's gone out to that project and it compiled everything. Since there's only one file, that's all it needed to compile. And lo and behold, there is the area of the triangle. Now, to save some time so you guys don't have to watch a 45-minute video, let me cut and paste, even though I do warn you about cutting and pasting. Let me cut and paste this over into our Zybooks IDE. All right. One more time. Public means that any class in this project can use this class. Public inside the main means any class inside the project can use this method. Static means that it's not going to create a new object from this class. Void means it doesn't return anything. This is the name of the class. These are the arguments that we can pass. And then we have all this wonderful stuff for our calculations. We hit run to run it. And we have the area of a triangle. All right. This is a quick and dirty little video kind of highlighting the high points. There is a lot of tutorials out there. I provide a lot of tutorials. If I provided a book, the book goes into this in much more detail. But I thought it was important to kind of see this in a live environment as we're going through this. And you're going to experience yourself. But, sometimes it has to be explained in small, manageable chunks. So with that being said, hey, let's go out and learn something.